She was dragged out of the church, her infant clutched tightly against her chest, just moments after burying her husband, until a sleek black car rolled up beside her. The door opened. "If you don't sign this waiver," snapped Victoria, her voice sharp and cold as winter steel, "you're not stepping foot in this church." Emily held her baby closer. The infant's knit blanket was already wet from the steady drizzle. Her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow, but her voice, though quiet, was unwavering. "He was my husband," she whispered. "I have every right to be here." "You were never his equal," came a deeper, condescending voice from behind Victoria. It was Anthony, Elijah's older brother, stepping forward, holding a folded document in his hand. "You're just some girl from wherever. You don't belong in this family." The church doors loomed behind them, slightly ajar. Through the narrow opening, Emily could see the altar adorned with white lilies, and just beyond it, a photograph of Elijah, his smile captured forever, framed in black ribbon. Her knees buckled slightly, but she didn't fall. "I don't want your money," she said, her accent faint but noticeable. "I just want to say goodbye." Victoria's mouth tightened. "Then sign the waiver. Deny any claim to his estate. That's all we ask." Emily's voice cracked, heavy with sorrow. "You mean everything he left for our son? You want me to pretend we never existed?" Anthony stepped forward again, impatience in his eyes. "Sign it, or leave." The air turned still. A few guests near the church entrance turned to look. Unease rippled through the crowd. No one moved. No one spoke. Emily looked down at her baby, whose cheeks had gone rosy from the cold. She kissed his forehead, then looked up at the church doors one last time. A final breath, a last bit of hope. She shook her head. "No," she said. Her voice was calm. "Final." Anthony didn't wait. He grabbed her arm roughly and shoved her back. "Then get out!" the baby cried as Emily stumbled down the church steps, barely keeping her balance. She caught herself on the railing, her body shielding her child. Her heart pounded. "You're making a scene," Victoria hissed, adjusting her gloves. "This is a respectable family." Emily looked around, desperate. The guests remained still. Eyes avoided hers. Some whispered. Others turned away. Then the church doors slammed shut behind her. She stood there, motionless. The rain fell heavier now. Her coat clung to her skin. Her breath caught in the chill. The baby whimpered, shifting in her arms. She pulled him closer, whispering soft Spanish lullabies to soothe him. She stepped away from the church, slowly, her feet leaden with grief. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay there, outside a place that had just erased her existence. At the end of the block, she found a low concrete ledge and sat heavily. She pulled her child close to her chest. Her tears flowed freely, mixing with the rain. She thought of Elijah, not in the casket, but alive, sitting in bed, smiling through pain, cracking jokes even as cancer consumed him. He had held her hand the night before he passed and whispered, "If anything happens, he'll come." I asked him. He promised. She hadn't understood what he meant, not then. Elijah had known. He'd seen this coming, that his family would turn on her, that they'd keep her out. They wouldn't even let her say goodbye. She rocked gently, whispering into her son's hair. Her body was his shelter from the cold. His tiny hand curled into her collar, clinging to her like she was the only solid thing in the world. The city moved around them. Strangers passed. Umbrellas bobbed. Cars rushed by. No one stopped. She was invisible, just another woman lost in grief. Until tires slowed on the wet pavement. A black car pulled to the curb. The engine shut off. The window rolled down. Emily barely noticed, until the back door opened. A tall man stepped out. He wore a dark overcoat and held a large umbrella. His shoes splashed in puddles as he walked forward. "Emily?" he said gently. She looked up, startled. She didn't recognize him, but something in his face, in his calm expression, pierced through her fog. She didn't move. Her body was soaked. Her arms ached from holding the baby too long. She stared at the stranger kneeling in front of her, unsure if she was dreaming or going mad. The man looked about late 30s, olive-skinned. Like he'd just walked out of a courtroom. His suit was simple, clean, dark gray, no tie. Rain dotted his shoulders, but he didn't seem to mind. "My name is Adrian Rivera," he said again. "I was Elijah's friend." Emily blinked rapidly. "I've never heard of you." "I know," Adrian said gently. "We met years ago. I was doing humanitarian legal work in South America. There was an accident in the countryside. I got trapped in a collapsed shelter. I was bleeding badly. Elijah saved me." He paused, glancing down at the baby cradled against her chest. "He carried me 4 miles to a clinic. Stayed the whole night. I asked him why he didn't leave me behind. He said, 'My wife would never forgive me.'" Emily's breath hitched. Adrian looked directly at her. "He talked about you all the time. Said you had the fiercest heart and the gentlest soul. Said if anything ever happened to him and I was still alive, I had to find you, help you, protect you." Adrian slowly stood and stepped back to the car. He reached inside. When he returned, he held a large manila envelope, worn at the edges, sealed shut. "This isn't a contract," he said, his tone soft. "At least not legally speaking." He crouched back down and handed it to her with both hands, his expression solemn. "I call it a compassion contract. It's a written promise. I signed it last year after visiting Elijah in the States. He made me write it. Said I'd need it one day. Inside are his words. He told me I'm to treat you like family. No hidden terms. No obligations. Just a vow of honor." Emily took the envelope but didn't open it. Her fingers trembled around the edges, as if she were holding something sacred. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I don't know you." "You're not supposed to," Adrian replied calmly. "I'm not here to take his place. I'm not here to save you. I'm here because he asked me to be." Emily lowered her gaze to the baby. His eyes fluttered open, restless, as if sensing something new, unfamiliar, but safe. "I don't have anywhere to go," she said quietly. It was the first true confession of her fear. "Then let's begin with that," Adrian said. "Come with me. I've arranged a place. Quiet. Clean. Safe. You don't have to decide anything right now, but you shouldn't be alone." He rose again and walked back to the car, opening the back door. Rain splashed against the pavement. Emily sat still for several more seconds, then slowly stood, adjusting the baby in her arms. She took one last glance back toward the church, far down the block, where the doors were still closed to her. Then she turned toward the waiting car. Adrian extended a hand. Emily hesitated, then inhaled quietly and placed her hand in his. It was warm, steady. And in that brief contact, for the first time since Elijah's death, she felt something she hadn't expected. She wasn't invisible anymore. She stepped into the car. The door shut behind her with a soft thud, and for the first time in days, she exhaled. The apartment was too clean, too still. Emily stood by the entrance, holding her son close, uncertain whether to step in or retreat. Adrian placed her suitcase gently on the floor near the hallway, careful not to let it hit the hardwood. He didn't say much, just looked at her with calm, kind eyes, and said softly, "Make yourself at home." She almost flinched at the word. Home had stopped meaning anything a long time ago. But still, she stepped forward, The space was beautiful, modern but warm. Instead of harsh overhead lights, soft lamps glowed from corners. Pale green and warm taupe covered the walls, making everything feel quiet, safe. There was no clutter, no excess, and still nothing felt cold. Adrian led her toward the back, where a door stood half open. "This is for the baby," he said, pushing it open gently. Emily froze. It wasn't an elaborate nursery, but it had clearly been put together with care. A white crib with a soft gray blanket, a small shelf with books and plush toys, bottles and formula neatly arranged, diapers stacked below a changing table, a soft rug, and by the window, a tiny wooden rocking chair with a yellow cushion. Emily blinked. "I had help setting it up," Adrian added quickly, catching her reaction. "A friend of mine has a baby girl. She helped me pick everything out, made sure it was safe, comfortable." Emily swallowed hard. Her instincts tangled with each other. Gratitude pressed up against caution. Everything about the room felt so thoughtful, so intentional. She scanned each detail. There was no name on the door, no assumptions, just space, offered, not forced. "Thank you," she murmured, so quietly she barely heard it herself. Adrian didn't press. He simply nodded. "I'll let you get settled. If you need anything, I'll be in the office down the hall." And he left. In the days that followed, Adrian kept his distance. He was always around, but never too close. He worked from his home office, sent emails from the kitchen, passed her in the hallway with a soft, "Good morning." Groceries appeared in the fridge, but he never commented whether she ate or didn't. The kitchen was hers to use. She cooked only when she had the energy. He never hovered, never asked questions. Still, Emily stayed tense. Her hair was always tied back, her posture guarded, her voice clipped and quiet. Each night she checked the locks, twice. Every time Adrian walked past her in the hallway, a coil of tension tightened in her spine. A voice from another life whispered, "Kindness never lasts." But the shift she feared never came. The kindness stayed, and slowly, her body began to let go. In inches, not miles. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. Her voice lost its edge. Then came the moment that unraveled her. It was a quiet afternoon, nothing special. Breakfast had been soft-boiled eggs, toast, tea. Her baby cooed in his crib. Emily had laid him down for a nap and walked into her room. On the nightstand, beside the lamp, sat a photo frame. She paused, her breath catching. She stepped closer. She picked it up. It was a photo of Elijah, one she hadn't seen in over a year. He was laughing, arms crossed in front of a food truck they'd visited on their third date. The sun caught in his hair, mustard on his shirt from the hot dog she'd teased him about. She remembered how he'd tried to say something in Spanish and messed it up, and how she'd laughed until she cried. Her eyes welled, but the tears felt different, softer. And beneath the frame was a folded note written in neat, even script. "He's still here. T." She turned, startled. Adrian stood in the hallway, a cloth in his hand. "I found it in a box Elijah left with me," he said. "I wasn't sure if. I didn't want to intrude, but I thought maybe it would help." Emily stared at the photo again. "You cleaned it," she said softly. Adrian nodded. "It had some dust. I wanted it to look. Loved." She couldn't speak. Her throat tightened. No one had done something like that for her since Elijah died. Everyone else had wanted her to move on, heal, get over it. But Adrian, he honored what was. The wooden box sat quietly on the edge of a shelf in Emily's room. It was small, unremarkable, the kind of thing easily overlooked until needed. She noticed it one evening after putting her son to sleep. A handwritten note was gently taped to the lid. "When you're ready, A." She hesitated, then lifted the lid. The box was light, but the weight it carried was undeniable. Inside, tied neatly with a faded blue ribbon, were several envelopes, yellowed slightly with age, their ink smudged here and there. She recognized the handwriting instantly. Elijah. Her hands trembled as she pulled out the first letter. It wasn't addressed to her. It was for Adrian. "Adrian, if you're reading this, I probably couldn't outrun the inevitable. Cancer is a slow thief, but at least it's honest. Thank you for being there, for keeping the promise I'm about to ask of you. Emily won't trust easily. She'll be scared, angry, silent. When that happens, don't push her. Just make tea. Sit near her. She'll speak when her heart can carry the weight." Tears stung Emily's eyes. She reached for the next letter, this one addressed to her. "Me, Vita. I wanted to write this before the pain fogs my thoughts. I know how hard it will be without me, and I hate that I can't be the one holding you through it. But I've left you with someone who sees you not just as my wife, but as your own soul. I trusted Adrian not because he's strong or successful, but because he understands. Silence doesn't mean absence. Kindness doesn't need an audience. If you're reading this now and you're still afraid, don't be. Let him make the tea. Let him listen. And remember, you were never just my wife. You were my miracle. I loved you until my last breath. Elijah." The letter shook in her hands. She pressed it to her chest, her breathing shallow and uneven. She hadn't cried like this in weeks. Not like this. That night, she didn't sleep. At dawn, she walked to the kitchen, her robe pulled tight around her. Adrian was already there, standing by the stove. He didn't look up. He simply reached for a mug, poured hot water over chamomile flowers, and placed the cup on the table. Then he sat across from her, not too close, not too far. He didn't ask questions, didn't say something hollow or rehearsed. He just waited. "I read them," Emily said softly. "I know," he replied, just as quietly. She looked into the rising steam, then back at him. Her voice trembled. "He knew me, even at the end." "He did," Adrian said. "And he trusted you to carry forward, just as you are." They sat together in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't beg to be filled. Then Emily did something she hadn't done with anyone but Elijah. She talked. Not about grief, not about custody battles or legal threats, but about life. She told Adrian about her childhood, how she danced barefoot on the rooftop in the Bogota rain, how she dreamed of learning English, not for school, but to understand the lyrics in the songs Elijah used to send her. She told him about their first kiss, awkward and bold, and how Elijah knocked over a salt shaker trying to impress her. She laughed then, remembering. Adrian didn't interrupt once. When she paused, he passed her a tissue. Not advice, not analysis, just presence. By the time the tea had cooled, something between them had shifted. Not into romance, not yet into resolution, but into a kind of quiet tenderness, born not of passion, but of understanding. In that soft morning light, surrounded by letters and memories, Emily no longer felt like a widow clinging to the past. She felt like a woman again, someone who deserved to be seen. Then, one crisp morning, an envelope arrived, heavy, thick, ivory-colored with embossed gold edges. Emily's fingers trembled before she even opened it. She already knew. Inside was a court summons. Victoria and Anthony Whitmore were suing for custody of her son. They claimed Emily was emotionally unstable, financially dependent, unfit to raise a child. She sat at the kitchen table, the document spread in front of her like a wound. Her hands shook as she tried to breathe. Adrian read it silently beside her, his jaw clenched. Then he set the paper down and looked her in the eye. "They're not taking your son," he said. Emily blinked back tears. "But they have money, lawyers, influence. They'll say anything to—" Adrian placed a hand over hers, firm, warm. "Then we won't just fight," he said. "We'll show the truth." And that's what they did. Over the next 2 weeks, Adrian poured himself into the case, not with aggression, but with focused determination. He didn't just build a defense, he built a story. Each night, he compiled photos, quiet, candid moments. Emily reading to her son in English and Spanish, bathing him, feeding him, singing as she rocked him to sleep. Some pictures she didn't even know existed. He printed them, captured the date, the time, the feeling, and then, with meticulous care, placed them in a leather-bound photo album. The boy's name was embossed in gold across the front. "This," Adrian said one evening, setting it gently on the table, "isn't evidence. It's a story. His story, and yours." Emily opened the album. Her hands trembled as she turned the pages. Her eyes welled with tears. "You made this? You didn't see yourself the way I did. The hearing came on a Thursday." Rain poured steadily outside, casting a gray sheen over the courthouse steps. Emily sat rigid on the courtroom bench, her spine straight, fingers trembling in her lap. Her nerves were stretched thin, tight like wire. Her son waited in the hallway with a caregiver. The room felt cold, clinical. Victoria and Anthony sat opposite, flanked by sharply dressed attorneys and crisp portfolios full of statements and accusations. They looked composed, prepared, unshaken. Emily felt exposed, small. Her name was called. She stood, walked slowly to the front. The questions began. Her voice shook. Her palms sweat. Her answers came clipped, sometimes incomplete. Her eyes searched for something, anything, and landed on Adrian just once. Under the table, his hand reached for hers. His fingers closed around hers with a steady, grounding squeeze. It didn't fix everything, but it helped. Then Adrian stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pace or slam the table. He walked to the center of the courtroom, the leather-bound album in his hands like a sacred object. He placed it gently on the judge's bench and opened it. "This," he said, calm and sure, "is what motherhood looks like." He turned a page. A photo. Emily teaching her son the word for light. Another page. Emily up all night with him when he had a fever, rocking him in the dim light of the living room. Another. Her singing quietly as she bathed him, wrapped him in a towel, kissed his forehead. "She's been called unfit," Adrian said. But never once has she asked for anything other than the chance to love her child. He paused. "I'm not standing here because Elijah asked me to protect her. I'm here because I've seen her, every day, and no man, living or gone, could love a woman like this and ever call her anything less than a mother." Silence followed. Even Victoria shifted in her seat. The judge flipped slowly through the album, expression unreadable. Then she closed it gently. "Thank you, Mr. Rivera." Outside the courtroom, Emily exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. She turned to Adrian, her eyes gleaming with tears. "You didn't have to do all that," she whispered. He looked at her with that same quiet, unwavering calm. "Yes," he said, "I did." And in that stillness between them, something deeper than relief settled in, something beginning to look a lot like trust. The knock came just as the sky outside turned orange behind the city skyline. Emily had just put her son down in his crib when the sound echoed through the apartment. Quiet, measured, but intentional. She hesitated at the door. Adrian noticed her pause. He stepped out from the kitchen, drying his hands on a dish towel. Their eyes met. "You don't have to open it," he said gently. "But if you do, whatever you feel, it's okay. I'll be here when you're done." She gave a small, tense nod and stepped slowly toward the door. On the other side stood Victoria. Emily hadn't seen her since the hearing. The older woman looked the same, hair pinned neatly, dark coat, but something was different, not just age. Something softer, a quiet exhaustion, maybe surrender. She didn't speak. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded cloth, cream-colored, with a faded blue border. Emily's breath caught. That cloth. She knew it instantly. The one she had used to wipe Elijah's forehead in his final hours. The one she had left on the hospital chair when she'd been too shattered to notice, too broken to remember. Now here it was, clean, pressed, folded, held in the hands of the woman who once tried to erase her. Victoria extended it with both hands, saying nothing. Emily's eyes burned. She reached out slowly and took the cloth with trembling fingers. She stared at it, not speaking. Then softly, He loved this. Victoria's voice was quiet, hesitant. He kept it under his pillow. That was all she said. No apology, no justification. Just a gesture, small, sacred. Emily looked up, unsure whether to say anything, whether to invite her in or let her go. Victoria only nodded once. Her lips parted like she might say more, but she didn't. She turned and walked away. Emily closed the door behind her. She stood still, pressing the cloth to her chest until her knees nearly gave out. Then, slowly, she walked down the hallway. The apartment was quiet, but the light over the kitchen table was still on. Adrian sat there, reading. A warm glow spilled across the table. A mug of tea steamed beside an empty chair. Next to it was a folded hand towel. He didn't say anything when she entered. She walked toward him slowly, each step heavy with the weight of the moment. He looked up and saw her face, tear-streaked, wordless. Without speaking, he pushed the towel across the table toward her and rose halfway from his seat, offering it. "You don't have to be strong right now," he said, his voice calm and sure. Emily took the towel and sat down beside him, still holding the cloth Victoria had returned. She didn't speak. Neither did he. They sat in silence, not the kind born of tension, but the kind that makes space for feelings too large for words, for grief that lingers, for kindness that stays. It was the first moment they shared that didn't belong to Elijah's memory. It belonged to them, not as widow and guardian, but as two people who had learned how to stay, even when everything else had fallen away. The backyard was modest, tucked behind the apartment building, bordered by ivy-covered brick and a wooden fence worn by seasons. Soft string lights hung overhead, swaying gently in the early evening breeze. Tea candles flickered on tables surrounded by fresh flowers, fruit platters, and small pastries. Emily stepped back and took it all in. The space felt gentle, intimate, full of quiet joy. This had been her idea, not a memorial, not another formal ceremony drowned in grief and dark suits. Just a gathering, a space for those who had known Elijah, not through bloodlines or headlines, but through kindness. A moment to remember his light, not his loss. No tears, she had told Adrian, just stories, good ones. He had simply nodded. Then we'll make it beautiful. And he did. She had watched him string lights late into the night, climbing a shaky ladder in his work slacks, muttering about how much he hated heights. He arranged each seat and plate with exact care, just as she had described. When she looked tired, he brought her tea. When she hesitated, he reassured her, not with speeches, just glances. He never made the night about himself, only about Elijah, and somehow about her too. And now the guests were arriving, neighbors, former co-workers, people from shelters where Elijah once volunteered. There were no speeches, no dress code, only warmth. Emily greeted each person with a quiet smile, often holding her son in one arm. His small hand clung to her shawl as she poured tea, offered names, nodded when someone began a story with, "I don't know if you ever knew this, but Elijah once." There were many stories. A woman shared how Elijah secretly paid for her daughter's medical treatment when insurance failed, leaving behind an unmarked envelope with a note that said, "Keep this between you and healing." An elderly man said Elijah had brought him meals every Thursday and stayed each time for a game of checkers. No judgment, just company. A teenager stood and said Elijah once told him, "You're not your mistakes. You're the one who decides what's next." That boy was now in college. Each story added another piece to Elijah's legacy, not as the man Emily once kissed goodnight, but as someone who had given so much of himself to the world in quiet ways. It humbled her, and it healed parts of her she hadn't even realized were still broken. As dusk folded into night and stars began to shine, the lights above them glowed warmer, casting soft halos over the gathering. Laughter drifted into the air, mixing with the faint strum of classical guitar from an old speaker near the porch. Emily had just finished refilling the tea station when she glanced across the garden. Near the corner, where lavender bushes swayed gently in the breeze, stood Adrian. He was holding her son, bouncing him gently in his arms. The boy giggled, tugging at Adrian's collar, and Adrian laughed, not loudly, but in that deep, warm way that wrapped the child in a blanket of safety. Something in Emily softened. She had seen Adrian serious, focused, protective. But this was different. This was effortless tenderness, fatherly, without asking for the title. She walked toward them, her shawl fluttering in the wind. The lights above turned his dark hair to amber, his smile edged in gold. She stopped beside him and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. He looked at her, surprised, but only for a moment. Then he nodded, understanding everything she didn't say. Emily didn't speak. She didn't need to. In that moment, there were no ghosts between them, no grief shadows, only the present. The child in his arms, the warmth of her hand, the softness of shared silence. For the first time, she wasn't stepping away from pain. She was stepping into something new, and it felt right. 3 years passed, and the world did not pause to notice the love growing quietly in one small corner of the city. There were no magazine features, no flashing rings on social media, no dramatic wedding vows. But what Emily and Adrian built was real. Together, they founded Elijah's Light, a foundation for single mothers and widows, for women who had once stood where Emily had, on the outside, invisible, scared, told they weren't enough. Now, Emily was the face of the foundation. She welcomed each woman with the same gentle presence Adrian once showed her, not offering pity, but dignity, not programs, but hope. "I know what it's like," she often told them, "to feel like you've lost everything and still have to be strong, but you don't have to do it alone." She didn't speak from theory, she spoke from memory. Behind the scenes, Adrian handled everything else: the legal work, the finances, the logistics. He never asked for his name on a plaque. He never needed the spotlight. He let the light shine on Emily, and stood just outside it. Proud, quiet, steady. Sometimes people would ask if they were together. Emily would just smile. We're exactly where we're supposed to be. Their home was filled with small, quiet rituals. Adrian brewed coffee each morning before she woke. Emily packed an extra sandwich in his bag, always with a small, handwritten note tucked inside. Friday nights were for puzzles and storybooks with her son, who now called Adrian simply T. They didn't need labels. They had rhythm. They had trust. What began in grief had grown into something solid, something rooted. On the third anniversary of the foundation, Emily stood by the tall glass windows of their main office, watching. The women she had once held through tears were now walking into jobs, into new apartments, into full lives. A soft voice broke her thoughts. "You ready for our walk?" She turned. Adrian stood by the door, one hand resting on the stroller's handle. Inside, the boy, now almost 4, blinked sleepily, cheeks flushed from a nap. Emily nodded. She slipped on her shawl and joined them. Outside, the sun dipped toward the park across the street. They walked slowly, hand in hand, along the path scattered with golden leaves. Children laughed nearby. A breeze rustled the trees. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Emily looked over at Adrian. He was pointing out birds, naming trees, humming softly under his breath. She smiled, then looked forward again, her eyes soft, her heart full. This wasn't the life she thought she'd have. It wasn't the life she planned. It was better. And in that final image, Emily walking with her son, her hand in Adrian's, the world moved gently around them. No grand declarations, no need for a white dress, just love. Simple, unshakable, enough.